Great to see you all here in this rather spectrally lighted room. What I should say is that this event, like several others in the Oxford Literary Festival this time, takes place under the auspices of the Orwell Prize, which itself is administered by the Orwell Trust, which I'm chair of. And although the festival has almost come to an end, there is another Orwell event about the BBC, which takes place at midday tomorrow. Unfortunately, it clashes with a solo event that I myself will be doing, so I won't be able to make it myself, but don't let that deter you. And we'd like, as ever, to say how grateful we are to the Oxford Literary Festival for accommodating this Orwell strand in its complex and complicated roster. I'm David Taylor. As well as chairing the Orwell Trust, I wrote a biography of George Orwell, which came out in the centenary year, which is 2003. And obviously, as an Orwell fanatic, I keep up with the cut and thrust of Orwell studies. This is Paula Byrne, who wrote an extremely suggestive, I use the word in an uncontroversial sense, book about Evelyn Waugh and his relationship with the Ligon family, Mad World, which came out last summer and was extensively and favourably reviewed. It was a must for all Evelyn Waugh fans. And tonight we're going to talk about the relationship between Waugh and Orwell, which may, on the face of it, appear to be a rather tenuous one. They were both born in the same year, in 1903. Orwell was the Eton-educated son of a minor colonial civil servant who went off and joined the Burma police. Evelyn Waugh went to a minor public school, got a scholarship to Oxford, and then launched himself upon the world of late 1920s society London as a kind of a scrivener, in-house writer, I suppose you'd call it, to the bright young people. Waugh was a success almost from the moment he picked up the pen, wasn't he? Waugh, I mean, he by the age of 25, he was a literary celebrity, whereas Orwell's apprenticeship lasted a very long time, and he certainly didn't achieve anything even resembling literary fame until 1945, when Animal Farm was published. And yet, there is a relationship between the two of them, and that each admired the other's books. Each had very interesting things to say about the idea of dystopia. I suppose we ought to start by just sketching out the chronological route. There are several letters exchanged between them. They reviewed each other's books. And when Orwell lay in the sanatorium at Cranham in 1949, just before 1984 was to be published, he was visited there by Waugh. Correspondence ensued. And it could almost be said that in some way Waugh was a great admirer of Orwell's writings, although he disagreed fundamentally with him about lots of things, which Paula will sketch in for us in a moment. One of the interesting things, I suppose, is how unwittingly, but he didn't mean to cause trouble, Waugh contributed to one of the great posthumous myths about Orwell, which is the one about his second wife, Sonia, being the gold digger who married her for his money. There's a letter that Waugh wrote, well, it was to Nancy Mitford, wasn't it? To Nancy Mitford just after his death, where he said, so G. Orwell dead, and Mrs. Orwell a rich widow. And although he wasn't meaning to be contentious by this kind of provoked several other Orwell biographers off on a long and I think ultimately unrewarding task of proving that Sonia married him for his money, which is an interesting topic. Anyway, that's the sort of the brief history of it all. But I suppose one of the interesting things is the distinctions, the separations of the background of the two, and yet the things that brought them together. And Paula, as someone who's extensively researched, not so much Evelyn Waugh's early life, as I suppose some of the myths that attached, the kind of romantic view he had of aristocratic life, and indeed aristocratic public schools. I mean, would you like to comment on that sure. separation?
Can you all hear me? Well, I was actually very interested in the life, and it's interesting that you said 1945 was the time that George Orwell first became popular, and in a sense, for me, Bridget Brophy famously said 1945 was the year war ended, as in Evelyn Waugh, and I think that as apart from being very witty, is rather true in some respects, because as David said, he was famous very, very young, and I think that trajectory sort of after 1945 is interesting. I mean, I love the sort of Honour trilogy, and I do think it's a great masterpiece. But my biography, which was a partial life biography, and I deliberately set out not to do the cradle to grave, because that had been done so brilliantly before, and I wanted to find a new way, a different way of writing about Evelyn Waugh, and I did that through his friendships and through his friendship with this particular family that was particularly sort of meaningful to him and the writing of Brideshead. So to be absolutely candid, my interest really sort of was up till 1945, but I'm still very interested in the relationship between Orwell and Waugh, and particularly some of you, I'm flogging somebody else's book here, aren't I? But some of you will have read this book called The Same Man, George Orwell and Evelyn Waugh in Love and War, and I think it's a terrific little gem of a book. I mean, I read it in a day, it wouldn't take you very long to read, but it basically does argue that although they seem so different, one's an atheist, one's a Catholic convert, one's a socialist, one's a Tory, all these differences in lifestyle, differences in families, and yet in terms of their loathing and contempt for the modern age, they were the same man. And so I think it's a really interesting book, and it sort of fired me up, having sort of thought, I've done the Evelyn Waugh thing now, and I'm going back to my love of Jane Austen. I've got all fired up again. But I was very interested in Evelyn Waugh's childhood. So, and what I did in my biography, I contrasted his childhood with the childhood of Hugh Ligon, who was the model for Sebastian Flyte in Brideshead, and was also a contemporary of Orwell, and indeed they went to Eton together and they would have known each other. And so I was very, very interested in Evelyn Waugh's childhood, and so we thought we might just talk a little bit about the contrasting childhoods and how that was the formative influences.
Well, you made a very interesting point, Paula. Orwell went to Eton on a scholarship, on a King's scholarship, and he described Eton subsequently as, 5 years in a lukewarm bath of snobbery. And he told every interviewer who asked him about it, he told that he replied once to a questionnaire from a foreign publisher. I was educated at Eton, but I went there, for family reasons, and I had no interest in the place at all, and it had no effect on me at all. Now that is a fatal misjudgment on Orwell's part, because Eton had an extraordinary effect on him, in that he was almost, if you read his diaries and letters, you'll find that he was almost fixated on the Eton-Harrow match. He uses public school imagery in his novels. In Down and Out in Paris and London, he will describe one of the waiters as looking like an Eton boy. Or he describes Rosemary, I think it is, Gordon Comstock's girlfriend, and Keep the Aspidistra Flying, as wearing a hat like a Harrow boy's hat. Now, I'm sure that not 1 in 100 of his readers would have spotted that particular comparison. And yet Paula makes a very interesting point in fleshing out, as I say, some of the myths and the romantic illusions that sustained Waugh's early career. She makes the point that Waugh was actually an Etonian monarchy, as you put it. Now, Well, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's simply not true, I don't think, for Orwell to say that Eton had no effect on him. And not least because Eton, at that time he was there, underwent this complete sort of sense of transformation because of Harold Acton and Brian Howard, who were the two boys who really revolutionised Oxford when they came. And, of course, Evelyn Waugh famously combines these into Anthony Blanche in Brideshead. But what they did at Eton was they began a society, the Eton Art Society, and they also published an incredible literary magazine called the Eton Candle in hot pink papers, not unlike my own hot pink folder, and in which there were poems from Edith Sitwell. It was absolutely extraordinary, and that sort of that group of Etonians were the ones that befriended Waugh at Oxford, and Waugh really felt that he'd missed out by not going to Eton. And in his autobiography he says, I was a clever little boy, and if I'd had the opportunity I could have gone to Eton or Winchester, and he rather resented going to Lancing, which he felt was very second rate. He hated that sense of being anything shop-soiled, minor public school. What could be worse? He absolutely thought Lancing was the pits, and famously said, you don't talk about Lancing when you get to Oxford. And so Eton, and in fact for those boys, this incredible group of boys, Oxford was a bit of a letdown because Eton formed everything they did. Cyril Connolly was part of this group, and when they wrote back and wrote their memoirs, it was Eton that really they talked about. And as I say, Oxford almost was a little bit whereas for Waugh, having gone to Lancing, Oxford was it. This was what he dreamed of. He found the friends he never had at Lancing. Sorry. No, Cyril Connolly said famously, didn't he, that really his life ended at the age of 19.
Absolutely.
When he got his Brackenbury Scholarship to Balliol, that was it. The summit of his career was being elected to POP, the Eton Society. After that, life could have no finer pleasure. The rest was just a slow decline, wasn't it?
And that sense in pop that one boy famously offered his sister for sex if you get into pop, and if you didn't get into pop, your whole life, it was over. And I think sorry, I've interrupted.
No.